The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, I hope you found it easy to join this webinar. I'm going to start on time. I hope everyone could make it. So welcome to our IT governance webinar about creating an effective cybersecurity awareness program. My name is Stephanie and I'm going to be leading this session today. I will introduce myself in a bit more detail, but firstly I wanted to explain a few technical details about the webinar. So you are currently all on mute. However, you can type in your questions in the panel during the webinar and I'm going to address them at the end, all at the same time. We will also distribute a copy of the slide deck for your information later. So the overall aim of this webinar or this session is to give some practical advice on how to implement an effective and engaging cybersecurity awareness program. To give you an overview of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to briefly introduce IT governance as an organization and also myself and my role and my experience. We're then going to go through a kind of traditional sequential structure, talk about effective planning of a cybersecurity awareness program. We will look at the sample architecture, which is by no means a one-size-fits-all solution, but I think it's a very valid model that has worked in many cases in my experience. We will then look at different steps of a typical architecture and a typical learning path, going through raising awareness, delivering knowledge and skills, transfer to the workplace and behavior change, and finally evaluation and reinforcement. In the end, we will have a brief conclusion and I will be able to address any questions which you have shared. So there is an inherent irony in this because I'm going to address how to make an awareness program more engaging and how to apply innovative strategies to engage your audiences. However, this is delivered in a traditional PowerPoint format, so unfortunately it's not as interactive as you would like, but we always have technical restraints. However, I hope you enjoyed the session and I will try to give as much practical advice as possible and also answer your questions. So about IT governance. As a company, we are an established IT governance, risk and compliance solutions organization. We see ourselves as a one-stop shop, meaning we provide a really vast array of different solutions ranging from software to consultancy, penetration testing, training solutions, obviously. We have been established for 15 years. We have offices in the UK and Ireland. We have served many clients across different continents in many different international contexts. And we have delivered more than 4,000 training solutions. So we deliver face-to-face training on many different subjects, ranging from data privacy, the GDPR, to information security, cyber security, as well as e-learning courses and many other solutions. in this area. A bit about myself. My name is Stephanie Redfalvey. I'm a learning design and solutions consultant at IT Governance, and I have also got international cross-sector experience in the design and delivery of various cybersecurity training solutions and awareness solutions, including Europe, Western Europe, France, Germany, as well as overseas, including Singapore, the United States, having worked with really large multinational clients to implement effective awareness programs. So firstly, before we really start looking at the program structure and examples, I wanted to briefly address why it's important to invest in an effective awareness program rather than just using a single e-learning module or something that is only just fit for purpose. So I think we're all familiar with the term learner fatigue. It's somewhat of a big buzzword, but that's the case because it really represents a big problem for learning and development departments, but also for compliance and quality departments, meaning that today's corporate audiences are oversaturated with normal learning solutions, traditional learning solutions. They have to complete so many different compliance training solutions that they simply become tired and overwhelmed with information. And that's why a really thought out, carefully architected program is important. Obviously, again, the broader the learning experience, the better. So the more different channels and formats you can offer your employees, the more they are likely to adopt a positive culture of cybersecurity, meaning that diversity simply improves the impact of your program. Then again, this is very common sense, but it provides stronger defense against threats and lowers the risks, thanks to increased awareness, better return on investment. It improves credibility and trust, not just amongst your workforce, but also from your clients and customers' side, depending on which sectors you work in and whether what kind of services you provide. The empowering of employees to make informed decisions. My CEO always says this lovely phrase, the size of your security function should be as large as the organization itself, meaning that the human risk factor in cybersecurity needs to be addressed, not just through your cybersecurity function, but through every single employee in the business. And again, that's why an effective awareness program matters. And finally, obviously, the consequences of non-compliance, as we have seen in recent months and years, can be very dangerous for organizations, not just from a monetary perspective, but reputation and many other senses. So here we have a brief example of a really kind of bare compliance requirement taken from ISO 27001, which is an information security standard, but also very closely related to cybersecurity. So you see that the wording, as we are familiar with from compliance-related subjects, is very straightforward and dry. But these illustrations around it kind of symbolize the different ways of implementing it and the different thought processes around it within an organization, meaning that no two learning departments, no two cybersecurity or compliance departments are the same, and organizations apply very different means to implement this awareness compliance requirement outlined. We're going to move on to talk about effective planning. So what we have just seen, as mentioned, was the very basic requirement as outlined by standard. And we're now going to look at how you can translate that into an effective awareness program that will not only meet the minimum requirements outlined in standard, but really build an effective culture of cybersecurity that is sustainable in the long term. So effective planning, I always say, is really everything, because it will determine the whole structure and the look and feel of your program, and ultimately it will determine how effective and successful it is. So you start usually by creating a learning needs analysis, and this should provide an overview of your employees' level of awareness. It should allow to identify any common gaps in knowledge. It should give an indication of employee motivation and attitudes. So it's not just about the level of awareness, but how do they feel about cybersecurity? Do they consider it a chore? Do they consider best practices to be associated to be viewed as hindering productivity almost, which can be a big issue to address? It's also about pinpointing trends in learning style preferences. So how do people in your organization prefer to learn and receive information? We've got the design of a structured learning path, mapping a number of suitable interventions to recommended timescales. So again, we'll talk a bit more about timescales and delivery in a little bit, but it's a very important point to consider right at the start. And finally, identifying business and learning objectives, as well as relevant KPIs for annual evaluation. And these should really serve as the blueprint or the skeleton, if you want, for the rest of your program. And you should really keep these at the forefront of your mind while you develop different assets and the program itself. It can be very easy to get lost in a sea of different learning assets and media assets and very aesthetically pleasing interventions, but to lose sight of your actual core objectives. Now, the way you can carry this out is through qualitative as well as quantitative analysis methods, using things like surveys, pre-assessments, stakeholder meetings, heads of departments meetings, where you can get a better view of where your organization stands, really. Now, this should still be part of the planning stage. The idea of the mixing bowl is that we are going to look at the ingredients of a successful planning stage and also things to consider when designing an awareness program. So we have the audience, which is very important. And depending on your organization, you may, for example, have a very multinational, multicultural audience. There are linguistic considerations, there are age considerations, and many other things which you should analyze before designing an appropriate learning intervention for this audience. Then secondly, we have budget, which is also a very big question for many clients. Depending on the size of your organization, you may only have a modest budget, but it's always important to make the most of it and also look at leveraging your internal opportunities. For example, a communications department or existing software assets, even your office suite can be very useful for your awareness program. So making sure that you make the most of your budget from the very beginning while being conscious of it. We've got return on investment. So again, we're kind of going back to our objectives and KPIs and looking at really getting the most for your budget. Motivation, this leads back to the audience again. What will motivate your learners? What will motivate your employees? What drives them really? Obviously there are universal kind of standards, universal models which you can base this on, which are widely accepted. However, you should again try to tailor it when possible. User experience, especially for digital awareness interventions, is very important, because these days audiences can't just be satisfied with a normal e-learning or a standard kind of traditional intervention. They want it to be easy to use, they want it to be intuitive and fast, so that's an important consideration. Your brand, it could be that you want a standard off-the-shelf solution because you have pressing timescales, or maybe you have more time, you want to create a sub-brand for your program. That also should be planned right from the start, and you should get the right individuals in your organization involved. And finally, and this is very important, again, timescales. They will essentially determine the structure of your program. So let's say that you have an internal audit coming up and you need something very fast, and that's no problem at all, because you can simply take an off-the-shelf e-learning program which is still of high quality and use that to meet the simple compliance component or requirement, and then complement that later with staggered interventions to make sure it sticks and to make sure your learners are kept up to date. Now next we're going to look at a sample architecture of a program, and as I mentioned, this is just one model which you can potentially apply. It is widely accepted. I have worded this in my own kind of outline, my own kind of vocabulary, but I'm sure many of you will recognize the basic structure, starting with the why, so raising awareness before you even start educating your employees about cybersecurity. It is important to get them on board, to generate buy-in, to make them motivated and want to learn more about the subject, and to get them to recognize its importance as well as their own role within it. Secondly, we've got the what, so that's about delivering the relevant knowledge and skills. And again, you have to be careful not to overwhelm your audience, so to deliver things in a concise format. And to really give them the essential knowledge they need to adopt best practice, which brings us to the next point. That would be the how. And that's all about the application. So often it turns out, and research has shown, that although people have high levels of awareness and they have the necessary knowledge, they do not actually apply it, because it can be considered counterproductive or hindering productivity, or people simply don't have the right habits. So this kind of step here from having the knowledge and then applying it on a daily basis in your work environment is a really crucial one for the success of your program. Then next we have evaluation. Again, it's important to measure the success and to monitor it continually. So not just on a one-off basis where you present learners with a test and they have a final score and that's it for the rest of the year. You should try to have regular evaluation interventions in order to make sure everyone's up to date. And finally, this is sadly all too often neglected. At the bottom, we have reinforcement, meaning that you should never consider your program to finish, really. It should be an ongoing effort from everyone involved to keep messages alive, really. Then here on the right, I have a quote about offering a modern mix of different learning tools to address diverse needs. Again, this has to do with your audience, but also with best practice and really delivering the best value. We're going to look at raising awareness. So if you think about the light bulb we've just seen, that's the first step here, the why. So as mentioned, this is not so much about delivering concrete instructions or concrete information. It's more about gaining global buy-in by your learning population. So to attain the highest levels of impact, it is important to generate personal investment at the start of the program. So in our sample architecture, this comes first because it will determine the success of the rest of the program in a way. So you want to try to generate emotional engagement almost with the subject of cybersecurity. And although that can sound difficult, there are many different ways you can actually do that, and many different kind of channels through which you can convey this message, which we're going to examine in a minute. So an example solution for this would be an opening communications piece, and this can take many different forms. It can be delivered digitally, it can be delivered through print, hard copy, or even face-to-face interventions. The core aim of this is to grab employees' attention. It should ensure that the audience views the training as more than just a tick box, so they should really care about it and invest themselves. And this will also ensure increased levels of attention for any e-learning or any other training interventions to follow it. So it will make sure that people are switched on in a way. It should effectively convey an overview of key messages in a concise, highly visual format. So while it can deliver information, it should be kept very short and snappy to almost whet people's appetite and encourage them to find out more. It should help to overcome any potential resistance to the initiative. So as we know, often e-learning, cybersecurity can be viewed as additional time-consuming kind of chores in addition to your daily work, which can already be challenging. And it's to overcome that preconception effectively, really. It should encourage reflection. Again, we will see a nice example of that in a minute. It should serve as a versatile learning and communications piece. So it shouldn't be something that you invest in once and then recycle. If you choose your concept carefully, then it can be something which you refresh in a quite cost-effective manner. It can be something which you reuse or repurpose also. So we're going to look at some examples. These are obviously from IT governance, but there are many different ways of realizing this within your organization. So this first example, the reason why it's quite beneficial is because it can still be launched and tracked from your learning management system. So while you can track completion status and see who has viewed it, it is not in a traditional e-learning format, so it won't feel like compliance obligatory e-learning. And the reason why is because of the kind of immersive classroom effect. Instead of having the traditional click next navigation, you have this remote control, and you really feel like you are in control of the experience, and you are seeking out, obtaining your own information in this virtual classroom environment. So as you see, there are no real facts about cybersecurity. There are not even calls to action or anything about what the individual should do. It's a real top-level awareness piece, communications piece, to make people aware of the consequences and the importance of cybersecurity or bad cybersecurity practices. And it should be kept very kind of short and punchy, giving people just a taste really of why it matters. So on one hand, you've got obviously the rational side. In this example, you see every 40 seconds a company is hit with ransomware. And that really addresses the kind of rational thinking in an individual, making them care about it. But you also have the emotional part, which can be presented through personal consequences or sample stories, scenarios, things like that. This is a different kind of visual example, which is also often used to present the consequences and getting people to imagine that this could be their organization, they could be responsible for these types of things. In my opinion, you don't want to use too many scare tactics or scare techniques. However, it is important to make people aware of the consequences, and it can be an effective buy-in factor when it comes to your awareness program. Next up, we would have delivering knowledge and skills. So when you remember the light bulb, we have seen this would be the what question. So this is the actual information which people will need to know and apply. So here we see, for optimal knowledge retention, information needs to be clear, accessible, and easy to digest. These quotes, when you read them, they often seem very straightforward and obvious. But at the same time, as I mentioned, when you are developing an awareness program, it can be very easy to lose sight of the basic sort of priorities. So when you move on to delivering this knowledge, you should make sure it's all very digestible and accessible. That can be done through different content presentation techniques, which we will also look at in a minute. It can be done through effective kind of visualization techniques. It can be done through good instructional design methods. And there are many different ways of making information more appealing, more memorable, basically, for your learners. So the sample solution for this point in our journey would be an online learning module. So a traditional e-learning module, this can be purchased off the shelf. It can be a very cost-effective solution, but you can also tailor it to the specific needs and contexts of your organization, depending on your budget and requirements. So as mentioned, this should convey content in concise units, ensuring that key information is accessible and easy to digest. It should make effective use of visualization techniques, provide a positive user experience that's really to cater for the needs of a younger generation in the workplace who expect really seamless kind of user journeys as they are used to in their daily apps and other activities online. And as already mentioned, based on proven instructional design methods. So it's important not just to throw together some ideas or think about what looks visually appealing. There should be some basic kind of psychological drivers at the basis of your program and your design. So here we've got an example from one of our off-the-shelf e-learning modules where people get to explore different data breaches on an interactive graph. Following this, they would be transferred to the workplace and behavior change. And if you remember the light bulb, this was that crucial step from converting knowledge and information and actually applying it and changing your behavior regarding cybersecurity in the workplace. And according to fairly recent research from 2017, there is this real gap between knowledge and application in many different workplaces, where it is found that employees have all the necessary knowledge, but they simply don't apply it in their daily activities because they find it counterproductive, or they simply don't have the right habits. So it is not enough to know what best practice involves. Learners need to apply their obtained knowledge in their everyday activities, as mentioned. But how do you achieve this? Now, there are different ways in which you can encourage knowledge transfer to the workplace. The sample solution we're going to look at are activities and scenarios. So you can kind of deploy these separately from your core learning solution, or you can even have a problem-based driven solution, meaning that you convey your knowledge and information through scenarios and activities. Again, it depends on your organizational context and your preferences, but it's certainly a consideration for your cybersecurity awareness program. So, activities and scenarios should be meaningful, encouraging deep reflection and the transfer of acquired knowledge to the workplace. So this essentially means they should be relevant to your organizational context, or they should be universally understandable at least. So for example, when we create our off-the-shelf modules, we always make sure that we include scenarios and examples from a really wide range of different contexts, so that everyone can relate in a way. They should make learners active participants by challenging them to recall key information in relevant contexts. And they should prompt participants to identify risks and apply best practice in situations that could arise in real life on the job. So the more immersive these are, the better really. There are many different ways in which digital solutions can actually reflect your day-to-day work environment. You can have Outlook simulations, you can have phishing activities, you can actually create a phishing campaign and see who responds and how they respond in cybersecurity. Which again you can have at the application stage, and you can compare it to before your program has been deployed and then after it has been deployed, to see the results and see whether it has made an impact and how important or significant that impact was. Again, this is an example taken from one of our off-the-shelf e-learning modules, where participants are presented with a really simple scenario involving a doctor's practice and the patient and his wife. And again, it is very universally applicable and relatable. It deals with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and participants are prompted to assign different roles to different people in the scenario. And you can really take this and apply it to a business context and think more carefully about who the data subject is, who the data controller is, and what their respective responsibilities are. Next, we're going to talk about evaluation and reinforcement. And again, it shouldn't, like the rest of your program, it really shouldn't be a tick box exercise. It should be something that you think about carefully in advance, and it should be tailored to your initial objectives and really measure the impact your program has had. So continual monitoring of progress will ensure that learners have achieved the required level of knowledge and understanding. It is highly recommendable to carry this out in a digital format because as well as providing you with insights and relevant data, it will also provide you with a very reliable audit trail to prove that you really have carried out this program. So this is just a screenshot from, again, one of our off-the-shelf assessments where participants will get a certification at the end. Oh, sorry. So what else is important about an assessment? It should be relevant. It should provide you with the knowledge and insights you need in order to design any follow-up interventions or any kind of learning nudges or other follow-up elements to your campaign that you think will be useful. You should make your participants aware that the assessment is coming, so it can be something they view as a goal to work towards, and to kind of get the best grades and get the most points they can. You can use rewards and things like that, depending on your company culture. You can use gamification and other things, which we'll also look at in a minute for your assessment. And next we have reinforcement, so ensuring key messages stay alive. It says here, once the program is finished, really your program should never be finished because it should be an ongoing effort from everyone. But once the core program is finished, it's important to ensure that cybersecurity remains at the forefront of learners' minds. And again, we're talking about that crucial step between knowledge and information and actual application. So people may start to apply best practice in the workplace, but simply not keep it up because of natural sort of memory decline and other problems. And therefore, you can have follow-up interventions to reinforce knowledge. So here's an example of what we call a gamified learning nudge. And this would be deployed multiple months after the core solutions have been rolled out in your cybersecurity awareness program. In this particular example, what we have done is we have personified the threat, because cyber threats often seem like something very removed and abstract, which doesn't affect people as they think. Personifying it can actually bring it closer to them and make them recognize that it's very much a real threat. So you have this concept where you have a hacker behind the wall and you need to use your knowledge to keep him out, and that makes it very clear that as a kind of human barrier, knowledge empowers you to protect your organization. So as you start, you are presented with different questions, and depending on whether you answer them correctly, you can build the wall to keep the hacker out and protect your organization. So again, this is just one example of a reinforcement method. You can do this in many different ways. You can deliver it in hard copy. You can design a pledge. You can design posters. You can design many different things or physical reminders in the workplace, just to make sure the key messages do stay alive throughout your organization. Now, finally, we have arrived at the conclusion and Q&A. So the three kind of takeaways, obviously there are many more things to consider, but I think three key points should be effective planning, getting all the necessary stakeholders involved from the start, and really using that planning and keeping your needs analysis in mind as you go along, developing and rolling out your program. So it should be there in front of you at every stage of the program. Personal investment, so that is including personal investment from project owners and stakeholders, especially senior executives, but also from the entire audience. So what we have talked about regarding emotional investment and emotional engagement is very important, right from the start, from everyone. And finally, continual monitoring and refreshing, meaning the reinforcement and also the idea of creating a sustainable culture of cyber security that will eventually sustain itself if you take care of it correctly. Now, finally, this is our contacts page. You can join us on LinkedIn. We're active on many different online channels. If you have any questions regarding the products or consultancy, you can email us or call us, and our team will be in touch and help you as well as they can. Right, so let's look at some questions we have. Oh. Okay, so we've got a few questions here. We've got, you mentioned earlier that you should implement KPIs to assess the effectiveness of a program. Can you suggest what KPIs might be used, please? A question from Gary. So if you're still online, I think, again, depending on your own priorities and your business, these need to be decided internally. However, I personally find, in my experience, one favorite would be something like a phishing campaign that is controlled, where you send out a kind of sophisticated, professionally designed phishing attack to your workforce, and you measure how they respond before the program and after the program, and that can be very effective. But obviously there are many other considerations around this, and I can make sure that we send you some literature about this. If you look at the IT governance blog, we regularly publish different literature about these things, so I will make sure we follow up. We've got one remark here saying, I'm surprised that there's no mention of dynamic policy delivery systems. Whilst I agree e-learning is critical, not least in terms of demonstrable statistic to the ICO, statistics on policy acceptance are equally important. Yes, that's very true. I guess that's all I can say to this one. So if you have any other questions, then please share them. As I mentioned, you can contact us online and on the phone, so do not hesitate to get in touch, and we'll see how we can address them. Okay, thank you very much for attending today.